Well, Western Kentucky's Student University Government Association just passed a resolution calling on their school to provide free tuition for all African-American students. Why is that? Well, they say it's to make reparations for slavery, a practice abolished more than 150 years ago. The resolution also, by the way, denounces standardized tests for, quote, upholding white supremacy, and calls on the school to admit any currently incarcerated black person who wants to attend. They do not exclude violent criminals from that category. Andrea Ambaum is a student senator at Western Kentucky University. She co-authored the resolution in question, and she joins us now. Andrea, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, of course.
It's Andrea Ambaum, by the way.
I beg your pardon. In either case, we're glad to have you.
That's fine. It's Adrian.
So I understand the reasoning. I think it's really clear. I don't think I agree, but there's no mystery about what this is about. But some of the details are unclear. So, for example, would the category, the benefits from this, include black students whose families weren't in the United States during the slaveholding period? Recent arrivals, for example.
I actually can't hear you very clearly. Let me try turning up the volume.
If you would. So let me just restate my question. Of course. The question is, would this apply to students whose families weren't here when slavery existed in the United States? So a lot of recent immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean, would they benefit from this?
So when we talk about reparations, we're definitely specifically talking about people who have direct ties to slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation. I think that there are separate but just as important conversations to have about African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants who come here and also face racial discrimination that inhibits them from education as well.
Huh. So even people whose families didn't suffer under state-sponsored discrimination or under slavery would be entitled to that. Those groups tend to do, as I'm sure you know from looking at the numbers, pretty well. In a lot of cases, out-earn native-born Americans. Why would they be entitled to this also, or to any special consideration?
So you're using the word entitled, and I don't know if that's the right word. When we talk about African immigrants who come here and face racial discrimination, I can actually speak on this very uniquely because I am the daughter of immigrants who came here. There is unique discrimination that faces African immigrants that many people don't talk about. Well, I feel like as this proposal specifically focuses on black Americans who have dealt with the effects of slavery and the inability to pass on wealth, which is really the big point that makes these groups disenfranchised and unable to get to college as readily as some groups are.
Okay. But what if those, well, you're really arguing two different things, but so let's stick to the primary one. How could you prove that your family was affected by Jim Crow or slavery? Would you have to show that your ancestors were, a certain percentage of them were African American? I mean, what would be the standard for this?
So these are important questions, and I'm actually glad you're asking them because the whole point of this resolution was to get a conversation started about reparations owed to black Americans, specifically in the form of education. So there are small details, such as the ones you're pointing out, that would need to be more nuanced and more focused on, but I don't think it's very difficult to prove that someone who hasn't immigrated here has suffered from the effects of slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation.
I'm not sure they're small details, though, and they kind of get to the heart of what I think may be the problem with this, or one of the problems with it, and that is you might have a body like your university or the U.S. government or a state government doing blood tests on people to decide who's in what racial category and then giving people benefits on the basis of that. And that used to be considered really creepy, you know, because it evoked earlier and uglier times when government would decide what category you were in based on your blood and help some people and hurt others. Does that give you any pause at all?
I think saying that it hurts others, I don't know what exactly you mean by that. So the whole point of the resolution is that college should be accessible to everyone.
Right.
And right now there are historical obstacles in place that uniquely affect black Americans that make college so that it's not accessible. Universities love to use words like diversity, inclusion, but they fail to recognize how slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, how all of these things still affect a lot lot of black youth today and make it very hard for them to get into college, and more specifically, pay for college. So the idea is not that this would hurt anybody. It would help people. And
well, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me stop you there. And I don't think everything you're saying is crazy or anything, but the idea that no one would be hurt by preferences for some doesn't really hold up. If I have 3 kids and I give 2 ice cream but not the third, I'm kind of hurting that kid because I'm showing favoritism to the other kids. And so, of course, it does. Any kind of segregation was bad because it showed favoritism to one group on the basis of that group's race. And this seems pretty much exactly the same as that. Why is it different?
And the word you use, favoritism, that's really important. To say that paying back African Americans for capturing them, enslaving them, then segregating them and pushing them into communities, to say that paying them back is favoritism, it's just not the right word, right?
Well,
it's
I don't know. And hold on here. An 18-year-old African American, maybe his parents are doctors, if you're giving him benefits over, I don't know, someone of a different color from a poorer background, it doesn't seem like justice to me. Does it to you? And that happens, by the way, a lot.
I don't know if it happens a lot, but
it certainly happens.
What we're talking about here is, sure, when you talk about economic privilege, some groups in different races are more privileged than others. That's a fact. That's true. But when we're talking about specifically black students getting into college, there are huge disparities in comparison. And that's really the point of this resolution, is to talk about those disparities and bring those to light.
I wish we had more time because I think it's a really interesting conversation. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks. The race is ending in a really ugly way. Earlier this week, the Latino Victory Fund released and then pulled an ad that attacks Republican Ed Gillespie's voters as racists who want to murder children. Democrat Ralph Northam's campaign has tried to distance itself from the ad, which is self-evidently disgusting. But not everyone agrees with that. LaDawn Jones was a Democratic member of the Georgia House of Representatives. She says that spot is perfectly defensible, and she joins us tonight. LaDawn, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Tucker.
So I guess what bothers me about the ad, I mean, it's clearly race baiting, but it's also factually untrue. There are no Gillespie voters that I'm aware of who have run anyone down with a truck. This ad is only designed to play upon people's racial fears, and it's hard to see how anyone could defend it. How could you?
Well, I find it interesting that you've managed to poll all of the Gillespie voters to find out what they do in their private time. But, you know, as a political consultant,
I read the papers. Wait, hold on. Has a Gillespie voter run down a minority child with a truck ever? I mean, do you know something I don't?
Do you know that? I know here in Georgia, there was just a woman convicted and given 30 years because she did go to an African-American child's party with her Confederate flag flying on her truck, and they drove in circles, as they called them, the N-word. So that happens. It happened in 2017, and it happened to me in the early 2000s.
Look, the awful things happen, for sure, and I never deny that. But this is a political ad in a governor's race aimed at a specific candidate and his voters, and there's no evidence that anything it suggests is true. There are no Gillespie voters who've done this. By the way, we just had a kind of mirror image of this in New York City this week, where a radical Muslim ran down people in a truck. One of the reasons they pulled this ad. Do you see any irony in that?
What I do see the most irony in is that in America, you can look at what happened in New York as terrorism, but when we talk about Charlottesville, in Virginia, where this race is going on, you pretend like that's not terrorism, as if that man with a Confederate flag on his car did not run over the poor woman, Heather Hayden. You know, so that's part of the problem.
Wait, hold on. So slow down. I don't know who you're talking about. I would never defend that. It's appalling. I think that is a kind of terrorism. I mean, of course, it evoked terror in people. No one's defending that, certainly not on this show. But the point is,
but
this
you're
is a
saying that this is
ad.
a non-realistic ad. And in
What
America, what you have to understand is that there are Americans who are really afraid of this.
Okay, but hold on. This ad is designed to win votes for a candidate away from another candidate, to terrify people. And the ad says this guy supports running down minority children. And that's a lie. And it's the worst kind of racial demagoguery because it's preying upon people's fears. It's the kind of thing the left is always denouncing. Oh, it's racial demagoguery. Here you have an example of racial demagoguery, and you're endorsing it. Why?
Well, you know what else that the right does? The right always says, we don't have time to be politically correct. Well, let me tell you what's something that's not politically correct in America. In America, there are Americans who are as afraid of someone running them over with a Confederate flag as they are of radical Islamic terrorism.
Sure,
and instead of running from this and shaming it, you need to say, you know what, this is an uglier part of American history. And whether it has to do with Ed Gillespie or not, I don't know. But I know it's a reality here in Georgia. I know it was my reality when I was a child.
Okay, first of all, you don't have a separate reality from anybody else. Reality exists independent of your
I think
views
you have
or
a separate
my
reality.
Views. No, look, reality
because you're not
exists.
recognizing what America is showing right now.
I don't want to have a philosophical conversation with you. I just want to make the point that this ad accuses somebody specific, Ed Gillespie, of a specific crime that neither he nor his voters have committed. Therefore, it is a lie. But more than that, it is bad precisely for the reasons you just explained. People are scared. This makes them more scared on the basis of a lie. Therefore, it's demagoguery. It brings us farther apart. Do you see what I'm saying?
Poor Tucker, what you don't realize is that without this ad, there were already Americans who were afraid of this reality. This ad just depicts that. And the fact that you're running from it and trying to fight that is the problem with America. It's the problem with Republicans. This is something that we are truly afraid of. In the same way you are.
Therefore, I'm part of the problem? I'm totally confused. Is there an Ed Gillespie supporter who's done this? Who?
Yes, there is. You are part of the problem not because you're objecting to a lie, but because you want to turn this into a lie. You want to turn it into as if Charlottesville never happened. You want to pretend as if white. Actually, it is. This is Virginia. This is a governor's race in Virginia. This is exactly about Charlottesville.
What did that have to do with Ed Gillespie? Look, I'm trying to be reasonable. I'm not sure you're capable of it, but I'm trying to walk through this slowly and ask you, how does what happened in Charlottesville relate to Ed Gillespie? Why is he responsible for it? I mean, maybe I'm too literal. Maybe I'm like caught in, ancient linear thinking.
No, you're trying to be literal. And you know why you're trying to be literal? You're trying to be literal because you don't want to recognize that there are white people in America that can be as bad and worse terrorists as the Muslim terrorists that are here. And you're defending this ad not because it has anything to do with Ed Gillespie. You could care less about Ed Gillespie. What you care about is what it depicts. You want to show that the Confederate flag is a part of our heritage. I salute one flag. That's the American flag.
We're done. You're a deeply unreasonable person. I hope you never get near power.